The Pledge of Allegiance behind me here. Okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag.
United States of America,
To the republic
republic for which it stands,
one nation,
nation, God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Okay, before we do a roll call, I just wanted to announce for public record that Heather Pransky has resigned from the village board. And at a later date, I will be informing the trustees with information for her replacement. So she is not with us this evening, so we thank her for her services to the village for the last 3 years.
Do you have a date, Andy, for that resignation letter? I know it was
I think it was March 17th, but
March 17th.
March 17th.
Thank you. Got it. Thanks.
Okay, and now can I have a roll call, Madam Clerk?
Mayor Maglio,
I am here.
Trustee Berkshire,
Here.
Trustee Devitt,
here.
Trustee Domke,
Here.
Trustee Pileski,
Here.
Trejo,
Here.
Quorum.
Okay, and staff with us tonight, just for the record.
Village Attorney Jim Knippen.
Okay.
Assistant Administrator Jason Belaski.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion for the presentation of this evening's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Desk set up here. Okay, moving on to the officials and staff report. Mine.
Andy, public comment was before.
I apologize. Okay, this evening we are doing a virtual meeting, and public comments were mailed in, emailed in, or left on a phone message. And we do have 2 comments, and I would ask our clerk to read those comments to be incorporated in our minutes for this evening.
Thank you. Our first comment, our first public participation request is from Jen Fisher. She's a business owner, and the topic is regarding the disaster proclamation for the village of Roselle. Her comment is, as a very small business owner in Roselle for the past 7 years, I would like to suggest that the village consider waiving the fee for the business licenses this year. Most of us are closed and losing money as we go through the COVID-19 crisis, and waiving the fee would be one way to show the village cares about their businesses. I suggest that all businesses must still apply for a license, but the fee for a basic license be waived. Example, my fee is $75, which I have already paid, and I am suggesting that the village waive at least $75 of each business license fee. And that's her comment. The second public participation comment is from Alex Behrens. I believe Alex is the coffee roaster. Is that correct?
Yeah.
His topic is how to help with the ongoing effort. He says, thank you for the hard work from the village during these times. I would like to ask the board if, beyond observing guidelines from federal, state, and local officials, if there is anything more that citizens can do to assist during this period. I would like to be supportive in any way I can. And that's the end of his comment.
Thank you for reading those comments for our meeting. Okay, can I have a motion to accept this evening's presented agenda?
So moved. Yes. Didn't we do that already or no?
We're redoing.
Oh. I'll make a motion.
I'll
All in
second.
favor? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on to officials and staff report. I'd like to ask for a motion to to adopt a resolution extending the declaration of the local state of emergency entered into March 20th of 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, Patty, on that?
Trustee Devitt,
Aye.
Trustee Domke,
Aye.
Trustee Trejo,
Aye.
Trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
Trustee Poleski.
Aye.
And the motion is carried. I'd like to ask for a motion to pass an ordinance ratifying the adoption action by the mayor executing executive order during the declaration of state of emergency.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call?
Trustee Devitt,
Aye.
Trustee Domke,
Aye.
Trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
Trustee Poleski,
Aye.
Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
And I thank you. Now moving on to the village trustees. If there's a trustee who has something to say, kindly signify by raising your hand. David.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fully in support of the actions we just took. If we do indeed end up holding the cancellation of the April 27th board meeting, I would just like us to extend the same offer that we just did to the public for this meeting to provide questions or comments to the board. I think that especially just with the people being heightened in paying attention to information right now, I think I rather we give more outlets for the public to engage us right now than less. And so fully trust in our staff and your ability to continue to manage the situation, but think let's continue just to provide the public an opportunity to ask questions, and those can be answered or shared if they're comments with the board via our weekly reports would just be my personal request at this time.
Totally agree, David. Anybody else?
No, I'm not a trustee, Mr. Mayor. There has been new guidance from the Attorney General's office with regard to public comment. Staff is evaluating that guidance just in case there are members of the public that are out there that know that. And when we have our next meeting, if further compliance is required under the Attorney General's guidance, we will bring it forward as well.
Thank you, Mr. Knippen. Yes, Wayne.
Just real quick about the police department and the job that they did in apprehending the one person that was involved in that robbery. I think that was an amazing thing. These public servants of us, the police, are on the job, even though the virus is all around them. They're still doing their job, protecting us. And I think we should make a special thank you to them in our behalf. And I can't believe the guy could post 10% of $850,000 as a just unbelievable. But my point is just if Chief Herron was there, I'd have to say great job by the force.
Thank you, Wayne. Yes, Lee.
Got two quick ones. So just related to the public comments that were just read. Number one, it'd be helpful to understand, I just don't have the budget in front of me, but just what the revenue impact would be if we were to waive business license fees of the $75. And then the other thing is I think to Alex's question, I think it would be helpful to maybe, I think one big thing to help out with the village at this time is just supporting our local restaurants. So maybe send out something through the communication just to reiterate how important our restaurants are to our revenue base and also just to the community in general, as they do sponsor a lot of events for the kids and everything. So I think that would be good just to reiterate to the public.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, moving on to our village clerk.
No report.
Okay, village administrator.
Yes, but to answer Lee's question, Lee, if I heard you correct, you wanted to know what the dollar amount was if we were to not have business licenses this year. Our budget includes $105,000 for business licenses. If the board needed more information, we can certainly provide that. If no other questions, I prepared a budget response plan as a result of the coronavirus pandemic that we've been going through. I meet regularly with my peers and on twice weekly basis, and they're doing similar proposals for their boards and councils. And I think, as you all know, in summary, we're facing challenges not experienced since our Great Recession. And we've certainly done, as Andy mentioned, several actions to date, the executive orders, which provide some relief to our businesses and residents, the state of emergency, which kind of provides us the ability to respond without board approval. But from a perspective, when you look at what happened to the village back in the Great Recession versus what's happening now, the efforts of our village boards over the past 10 years, past ones and the current boards, to put ourselves in a much better financial position has given us an opportunity to better deal with the situation we're going through right now. But certainly we have challenges that we face, and there are four of them really I think it's important to reiterate. One is the uncertainty regarding the duration of the pandemic. Two is the magnitude of the potential revenue shortfalls we are going to experience. And three, probably most important, the lag in reporting. As you all know, we won't know until June and July what impact our sales tax will be for the months of March and April. So that uncertainty, that lag in reporting certainly leaves us with a dilemma of how do we project what our revenues are going to be moving forward. And finally, as we all know, with the $2 trillion bill that was passed by the federal government, we know what impact does that have on local governments, and that is still uncertain. So those four key challenges are the reason why we put this budget plan together. And our main goal and objective is to kind of remain financially sustainable and resilient during this crisis and any other crisis. And when we put this together, we looked at kind of four key elements of preserving, and that's number one, keeping our operating fund reserves intact. The board has a policy for those, but as a non-home rule community, we have more challenges than home rule communities in how we deal with revenue shortfalls in the future. So keeping that in the back of our mind. Most important, unlike the Great Recession when we reduced our workforce by 20%, we are pretty much at bare minimum right now. We know this pandemic is going to end, and we're going to have to come out of this and be able to provide those same services we were providing before. So keeping our employees working now throughout this crisis is very, very important. Three, we have to understand that while our goal right now is to freeze the filling of certain positions, we may need to fill those between now and when this pandemic crisis ends, and probably sooner. We are going to need to fill these positions to do some of our day-to-day work. And finally, how did we evaluate what we're going to defer or what we would eliminate? We really looked at the health and welfare of our public, of our community, but also evaluating all of these things based on the safety of our own employees. So what I put together, and I'm not going to review that for you, I really wanted to put that together for you, is really, it's kind of 5 phases, 5 different approaches that I put them in order, but some will kind of intermingle with each other. And one is to continue to evaluate the state and federal reimbursement. And we're doing that through our councils of governments and legislative actions through our representatives to ensure that not just our expenditures that we're experiencing as a result of the crisis, but the revenue loss. And while there's certainly some uncertainty that, you can be sure that our partners out there are pushing our legislators to ensure that that revenue reimbursement for our shortfalls should be front and center. Number 2, we've had some deferral or elimination that we've recommended. I've included in there certain equipment, certain projects. I'd certainly like your feedback today on what we've listed. As I previously mentioned, freezing certain positions right now is very important. Number 4 is rethinking and being creative if we have to with some interfund transfers that we've done in the past. We know kind of the tie-in with, if we're going to hold on equipment, then why make that interfund transfer between the general fund and the equipment replacement fund, that why not use that and keep that in there, and then we don't experience an expenditure. And more important, the MFT, if we don't do an SIP or we don't do the water main program, things like that, then why not use more of those MFT funds that we transfer or used for those to transfer to our general operating fund to cover employee expenses, to cover street maintenance related. So I think we can be creative with some interfund transfers to help our bottom line in the general operating fund. And then really keeping our reserves as a last resort. While our board, this board and past boards have grown our reserves in our operating fund, most important thing is we're a non-home rule community. And if we get to a point where this extends beyond this fiscal year, we're going to need those reserves. So kind of keeping those reserves in place and doing some of these other things with deferrals and more creative transfers would be staff's recommendation. I provided you, Tom has done a very nice job, our finance director, of projecting out some revenues. I feel in a better position for those communities that are on a May 1 versus a calendar year like us. They're going through their adoption of the budget process now, and what do we do? For us, we've already got our budget adopted. And as you also know, we do have revenues in place for January, February, and early March, sales and income tax that we're doing very, very well. So it's really projecting out based on those months moving forward, what are we going to do? And I think overall, we've made some projections that are consistent with what our peers are doing out there, that overall we can expect a 30% reduction in revenues. Whether that occurs or not, we don't know. We had to start somewhere, so we provided what those numbers would look like. I've provided some examples of recommendations we are with deferring certain equipment. I think our vehicles, deferring that purchase, keeping that. Our small capital projects, municipal building improvements, sidewalk improvements around the village hall that aren't jeopardizing the public safety or our own employees. I think the two big questions are with the SIP, the street improvement program, and the water main. As a staff, we feel there is no need to move forward with those this year. And while those are in different funds, we may have to tap into those different funds to keep our employees working and so forth. And as a result of these kind of actions where we've recommended, we've went through some of our, 4 of our 10 purchased for vehicles, we've went through and went back to our vendors and said we want to cancel, and only one has a minor fee to cancel. So we're recommending that all 10 of those vehicles budgeted, those 4 that were previously approved, be stopped. We just don't do those. And with regard to the street improvement program, we've already let that contract, but we went back to the contractor, and the only cost we would have would be just about $4,000 to cover for his bond that he had to purchase. Otherwise, we can get out of it. Well, long story short, I think we've provided a good phased-in approach. We provided some examples on what we can do to kind of mitigate those revenue shortfalls. And then just to give you one last thing with the totality of how did we make these decisions, we're also looking forward. We got our actuary report last week for our public safety pension contributions, which will go into the budget next year. And just as an FYI, keeping those assumptions the same, for example, the investment assumption at 7%, keeping that the same and not reducing that further, we're still looking at $300,000 in additional expenditures to our general fund to cover public safety pension contributions in 2021. So having our eye out onto the future is important too. Property tax, I sent you an email. We see what the Finance Planning Committee is going to do with the county. Certainly there's an opportunity here for the county to act like their other county, our neighboring counties, deferring that first installment until later this year without any penalty to the property taxpayer. That is a cash flow issue for us. It's not, we're going to get that cash, it's just when, but we need to be mindful of that. I think when we look at our capital projects, and if we're having vacancies that we're not going to fill, our ability to manage a project like the street improvement program is not going to be as easy. So we tied those two together. There is a nexus between, saying, freezing employee positions that we need to fill and holding on capital projects. And finally, there's the Abjeris project. That has an opportunity, depending on when they get into the ground, to look at building permit revenue. We all know what that dollar amount is. If they get in the ground this year, that can be impactful. That'll be all spelled out in a development agreement with the developer, but there is an opportunity there. So my point in ending here is that we've kind of looked at everything in total, come up with a proposal, and we're certainly, I've heard from a couple of you over the weekend and today, but I hope that kind of fits what you're thinking. If not, we'll take some feedback from you and do what we should. But I think it's a good first start to address what is this impending revenue shortfall. So thank you, Andy.
No problem, Jeff. Anybody got any questions? Bruce?
Hey, Jeff, you mentioned the contract that we're going to cancel and they're going to pay the $4,000 for their bond. Not knowing what that project was, but if we have to go back, then they'll have to get another $4,000 bond. Is it one where a project where we can just tell them to defer or to hold off, and then we'll look to see and reevaluate? And so that way, if so, we don't pay the $4,000 for the bond and then start it up again, and then have to pay another then they'll, we'll ultimately pay another $4,000 because they'll throw it in their bid. So my question is, can we just put that one, work with the contractor to say, we'll be willing to pay your $4,000 bond, but also let's just wait to see what our latest start date is and whether we can actually restart that.
That's a good question, Bruce, and I don't know if I've got the entire answer, other than this is an IDOT project, and I have a feeling that we will be rebidding this project in the future.
Okay.
I will make a note to get that back to the board.
I mean, because then it might be, then we don't even have to go through the bidding process again, if it's something we can get started, if the world normalizes, and we might be able to get started.
I will get that for you.
Okay, thanks.
David?
I'm just going to echo what Bruce said. I think I'm totally fine on any physical asset purchases, delaying those outright for the entire year. I think any contract that we're going in, I rather say that's pending, and then we can evaluate those as staff recommends and make a decision, because I think contractual services I'm much more cautious on, because if the marketplace does respond later in the year, we might want to take advantage of that circumstance and situation, because there are things that would be an undue burden to us next year if we fall behind in our projects right now. Getting a truck or a car a year later, yes, there's maintenance costs associated potentially with that, but not the same as if there's a surge in demand the following year because everyone held off. So I think I much more rather be aggressive on asset purchasing and be much more evaluating line by line on some of these contractual services, especially the streets and the water, to your point, because it makes me concerned just to defer all those, granted understanding our financial situation.
Yes, Wayne.
I'm not, everything Bruce said and David said is so well said. I couldn't even add to it, but I do want to mention a couple of things. First of all, this is unprecedented, and we're going to learn a lot from this situation. I just want to know your opinion. Do you think that any campaign that we would ever have for going home rule would be something where we would use this as an example of what home rule could have done for Roselle? As a threat, oftentimes home rule becomes more viable than if there's no threat. Just something to consider. And then I also wanted to say something about 2008 and 2009. Andy, you were part of that, but there's others that were on the board that really pulled Roselle through the muck and mire of that time. And when I got on the board, they had almost accomplished all those rectifications of things. They saved the village basically, and they should get some kudos for that, because we're going through it now ourselves, and we're understanding what they had to go through in 2008 and 2009. So, and I know Jeff, you were there, and I think Jay, you were there too, right? And Patty too, and you guys went through a lot of hell just to try to pull Roselle through. And I'm really appreciating your previous experience when you are addressing this problem now. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. It was just being mindful in those days as we're being mindful now. We are looking at every possible aspect that we possibly can. I think that's what our staff has presented to us. That's what we've talked about. We're not bulletproof, and we're going to take every measure we possibly can to get us to where we have to be.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay.
Jeff, just really quickly, one comment with regard to Bruce's comments, which were excellent.
Go back there too, please.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. One comment with regard to Bruce's comments, which were really excellent, is whether or not this contractor may be able to secure all or a portion of the premium on that bond back from the bonding company. I don't know the details of this bond, but one of the things that's clear is that contractor is not going to have any legal exposure going forward with regard to what that bond was probably posted to do. And if the contractor is going to have no legal exposure, the carrier on the bond has no legal exposure. So you would think under those circumstances, they might be amenable to refunding that money directly to the contractor, or some kind of pass through with the village, so that bond money comes from a different source other than the village. And I just want to get that out there while I'm thinking about it, because there's so much going on right now. If I don't articulate that right now, I may lose it by tomorrow morning. So just a thought.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Jeff, you have the kind of the synopsis of what everybody is thinking.
I think Bruce had a question, Andy.
I'm sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, just actually a comment. I was just talking with some of our surety underwriters, and Jim's got a valid point there. We are actually, if projects aren't stopping, Zurich is refunding some of those premiums because, again, like Jim said, there is no liability on anyone's part if that project does not start and or cancel. So we may not have to actually pay anything. I would go in and request that they get a letter or something back from their insurance carrier indicating that they will not refund that bond money. I'd hate to be paying $4,000 just because someone doesn't want to make that phone call to their underwriter.
Understood. We'll direct staff to do that, Bruce. Yes, Jeff.
I just want to make sure, is the board comfortable? Because David, I want to make sure the recommendations we have is to kind of defer the purchase of the vehicles and then continue to evaluate the larger capital project like the SIP and the water main. Is that what I heard?
That's what I heard, Jeff. Anybody? Yes, Lee?
Jeff, real quick, can you remind me how much the SIP was?
The SIP was about 750,000. The water main was 1.3. And the reason we did the water main is because you're not going to dig up the street to do, those are both together because we tie both projects together. So
Got it.
$2 million between the two of them.
And the main reason why we want to defer is because of MFT revenue, or what's the main reason why you want to defer?
I think a couple of things, just the uncertainty of knowing the impact this on the general fund may require use of funds from all funds, and stopping a capital project while we can and not endanger the public safety. I should say we're still going to do some street patching. We're still going to do some things like that. But that was the main reason, Lee. Also just tying the vacancies of staff, our ability to manage a program at the same time if we're not filling positions. So don't know if I'm answering your question clearly.
No, I think you are. And just for clarity, the water mains replacement, there's no risk to public safety in terms of the water quality due to the water mains not being replaced, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I support delaying it. I mean, it makes sense. Like you said, we don't know how long this is going to go. We don't know what the final net impact is to the village budget. So I think it's reasonable to hold off. And then, like Bruce already articulated, I think it's reasonable to, kind of do the legwork in terms of not paying anything, given that they might.
David, did I hear you correctly?
Yes, I guess my feeling is let's have that conversation as a board when we have more information. I don't think I'm not saying let's move forward with these projects today, but should the situation dramatically change in 2 or 3 weeks, there's plenty of construction time. I think there's EPA regulations we have to be aware of that we could fall into a tighter, we're condensing what we have to get done in a certain amount of time to meet requirements. Plus, I know we're spending a lot of money on maintenance with water main breaks happening. And it seems like they increase each and every year. So I think I would want us to have the ability to evaluate this, and it's an evolving situation. So I think to completely blanket say we're not doing this year, I think is a little bit premature. I think we just need to have line of sight to any and all contractual infrastructure projects, so that way we can make those decisions and at least hear what the risks associated with those are.
And Mike, and I apologize if I was trying to say to get started. No, mine is, let's just wait it out and see. Let's talk with these contractors to see what their latest start date is. And then we know when we have to make that decision. And then we will see where we are at that point in time. And then we'll make that call.
Yes, Lee.
Yeah, and I concur with what they just said too. I mean, I think it's reasonable to have these on the chopping block, but I also think it's reasonable to understand that final go, no go date, because obviously none of us know how long the stay-at-home order is going to last. We don't know how long the pandemic's going to last. So like, I think it's reasonable to have these as the list on the chopping block. And if we do have to push them out till next year, but I do think we should understand the drop dead go, no go date.
This is very helpful. Thank you. One last question. I don't want to belabor. The zoning ordinance meant a lot to everybody. I put that in there as $67,000. We're at a point, according to Pat, that if we had to pause, we could. But I know the importance of this rewrite, what it is. For me, it was balancing, our employees. We're not hiring positions, and then we're going to go ahead and spend money over here on a project. I didn't want to do that, but I certainly the street improvement program and the zoning ordinance were kind of what I wanted some feedback on.
Anybody got a comment? Yes, Bruce?
I'd say postpone it. I mean, we've lived this long with the ordinances the way they are. Another 6 months to a year is not going to hurt anything. Keep the 67. We might need that for something else that we could, if we had, for example, we had to pay $4,000 for the bond, why wouldn't I use that money?
Wayne?
I was a big proponent for that program to redo the zoning rules, but I agree with Bruce. That's a variable cost right now under the present pandemic. I would delay it too until a time when we know that we can afford to revisit it. I mean, this is just like anything else. There's certain things, when you laid out everything that you could possibly trim, I love what Lee said. It's on the chopping block, but I love what David and Bruce were saying. Timing is everything and priorities are everything. You prioritize what you can cut. And they say the economy is going to come back, but it's not going to come back with a light switch. It's going to be rolled back out. So that's the same way we'll be having to watch our cash flow. So I would delay it.
Guys, I think we're all saying exactly what staff is trying to do. We're being very mindful of what's going on, looking at project by project when it comes to that. We brought in front of the board again when it's time. I do like the idea of if we have a dead or a knockdown date that we cannot do it at, to be aware of that and move forward from there. So I appreciate what staff is doing, being where they're at and moving on.
I just want to add that one other thing too. The employees are very important at this time. We've spent a lot of effort to get the right people in. And even though we're not fully staffed, we've got some really good assets in that regard in our village, as well as the businesses. We don't want to lose anybody. So those are the important things right now to try to get through this. All the other stuff is just projects.
Lee, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Jeff, I know you said Pat thinks that we're in a good spot in terms of hitting pause on the zoning ordinance update. Is that something that we've already talked to the contractor with? And do you know what their opinion is on that?
I didn't follow up on that with Pat, just took his word that we are, and I think that's a to-do coming out of this discussion, is to get the board some more info on what that means by pausing.
Yeah, I think it's helpful just to understand, I mean, he might have already had that conversation with them. I just want to make sure that they're in alignment with that too, and that they're ready to kind of come back up once, things get normalized again. And also, how long can we delay it for while keeping that same pricing structure?
Okay.
You've got quite a bit of leverage because you've got a discretionary termination provision in that contract.
Thank you all very much.
All righty. Village Attorney, do we have a report this evening?
None.
Okay. Chamber of Congress liaison.
Nothing today.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda. All items listed on the consent agenda are considered to be routine, procedural, and informational, self-explanatory, and non-controversial in nature and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no discussion on our consent agenda. Okay, and if I can have our village attorney give us a summary of the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On tonight's consent agenda, we have presentation and approval of Village Board and Committee of the Whole minutes of March 9th, 2020. The adoption of ordinances amending Chapter 10 of the Village's Traffic Code to establish no parking zones on East Granville Avenue and on Rodenberg Road for the Waterbury School issue. And the final item is the authorization of the Public Works Director to submit a joint purchase requisition for road salt.
Okay, can I have a motion to accept tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Devitt,
Aye.
trustee Trejo,
Aye.
trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
trustee Poleski,
Aye.
and trustee Domke.
Aye.
Our consent agenda is accepted. Okay, moving on to our regular agenda under community development. David, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute a contract for professional services between the Village of Roselle and HR Green Incorporated for building and site civil plan review services associated with the Abjeris and Associates Incorporated East Irving Park Road Development Project.
Can I have a
Second.
Mr. Domke, thank you. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Poleski,
Aye.
trustee Domke,
Aye.
trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
trustee Trejo,
Aye.
trustee Devitt,
Aye.
And our motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute a contract for professional services between the Village of Roselle and Walker Consultants.
Second.
Mr. Domke, seconded. Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
discussion? Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call?
trustee Poleski,
Aye.
trustee Domke,
Aye.
trustee Trejo,
Aye.
trustee Devitt,
Aye.
trustee Berkshire.
Yes.
And our motion is carried. Anything else this evening?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, David. Under administration, Patrick, we have nothing. Under fire, we have nothing. Under police, Mr. Domke, we have nothing. Public Works, Mr. Brookshire.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute change order number 2 for the Devlin wastewater treatment plant influent pump and screening project between the Village of Roselle and William Brothers Construction, Inc. in the additive amount of $2,766.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trejo, for your second. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call?
Trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
trustee Trejo,
Aye.
trustee Devitt,
Aye.
trustee Poleski,
Aye.
and trustee Domke.
Aye.
And our motion is carried.
Okay, so then I'd like to make a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute change order number 1 for the wastewater facilities master plan project between the Village of Roselle and Trotter Associates, Inc. in the amount of $14,440.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Trejo, for the second. Any discussion? Yes, Wayne.
I did ask Jeff on an email if any of these expenses can be put into the TIF because they relate to seeing our capacity. Is that possible, Jim, or anybody?
Yeah, that is possible. And we're looking at that, and you will see that fully developed in the development agreement for the site.
Ah.
Because there's a variety of different ways to allocate TIF funds, and the manner in which you allocate them may have a financial impact on the village. We will look at it as a complete package at that time, the determination of how it relates to permitting fees, the like, and these specific costs and overhead, which in my legal opinion are TIF eligible. But we'd like to look at it as a complete package so it's well balanced from the village's standpoint.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call?
Trustee Berkshire,
Yes.
trustee Trejo,
Aye.
Trustee Poleski,
Aye.
trustee Domke,
Aye.
trustee Devitt.
Aye.
Our motion is carried. Anything else this evening, Mr. Bruckner?
Nothing further, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, under finance, it is handled under our executive order. So we have nothing from Mr. Trejo. We have no executive session this evening. Our public comments have been read at our beginning of our meeting. Any other business for discussion only? Can I ask for a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen and Madam Clerk.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay